Please, I'm not pure, she begged. In a snow-swept frontier church, a broken woman hides her face beneath a shawl, until a giant cowboy steps forward, pulls back the cover, and kisses her anyway. The room falls silent. Dust swirls in the lamplight. The church bell tolls like a warning. But this is no simple love story. The town whispers about her shame. The railroad eyes her family's land. And the lawyer who once promised her marriage now plots to ruin her name forever. She holds an old deed in her hands, proof of a legacy worth more than gold. Yet fire, lies, and betrayal close in on every side. One man's strength and one woman's courage stand against the power of an empire. Will the kiss that shocked the town become her redemption, or her final undoing? Every story I share leads with love, for people, for healing. For the things we sometimes forget to say out loud dot the winter wind whistled through the gaps in the mission. Church's wooden walls as Scarlett Torres pulled her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders. Snow had started falling outside, dusting the windowsills with white. The small building creaked and settled, filled with the warmth of bodies packed into rough-hewn pews for Sunday service. Scarlett kept her eyes down as she slipped into the back row. The familiar whispers started immediately, like rattlesnakes in dry grass. She caught fragments of harsh words: half-breed, ruined woman, shame. Her cheeks burned, but she held herself straight the way her grandmother had taught her. The old Apache woman's voice echoed in her memory. Walk with dignity, Nina. Your worth comes from within. The congregation rose for the opening hymn, their voices lifting in amazing grace. Scarlett's own voice, usually strong and clear when she sang to the children, remained trapped in her throat. Her hands trembled as she gripped her worn hymnal. The pages soft from years of use dot when the final notes faded. Scarlett found herself moving forward, drawn by a force she couldn't name. Her boots made soft sounds on the wooden floor as she approached Mrs. Henderson, the preacher's wife, who stood near the altar arranging flowers. Please, Scarlett whispered, her voice catching. The words she'd carried for so long spilled out. Like water from a broken dam, I'm not pure. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Someone snickered in the back. Mrs. Henderson's face tightened with discomfort. Her hands stilling on the flowers dot heavy boot steps broke the quiet. Michael Boone moved through the congregation, like a ship parting waves. His presence filled the small church, broad shoulders, scarred hands, eyes that had seen too much during the war. He carried himself with the quiet strength of a man who knew hard work and harder choices. Without hesitation, he stepped up beside Scarlett. His rough fingers were gentle as they reached for her shawl, removing it with the care one might show a precious thing. The morning light from the windows caught the silver threads in the fabric, making them shimmer. A woman's worth, Michael's voice carried clear and strong through the church, comes from her maker, not gossip. He bent down and pressed his lips to Scarlett's forehead. A blessing as sacred as any prayer. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open, her flower arrangement forgotten. Some faces showed shock, others disgust. But a few, especially among the older women who remembered their own struggles, softened with understanding. Reverend Henderson cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to proceed. The regular order of service had been disrupted, but something holy was happening all the same. He fumbled with his Bible, then simply said, "Let us pray." The congregation bowed their heads, but many eyes stayed open, stealing glances at the tableau before them. The scarred cowboy standing protective beside the woman everyone had scorned. Michael's hand rested light but sure on Scarlett's shoulder, and she stood straighter under his touch. Like a flower turning toward the sun, the service ended in uncertain quiet. The usual cheerful chatter replaced by meaningful looks and whispered conversations behind raised hands. As the congregation filed out into the cold afternoon, Scarlett and Michael walked side by side down the church steps. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting long shadows across the snow-dusted ground. Their boots crunched in perfect rhythm as they headed toward town. Neither spoke. Words seemed too small for what had passed between them. Instead, they walked in companionable silence, their breath making white clouds in the winter air. People, On the boardwalk stopped to stare as they passed. Scarlet held her head high, Michael's steady presence beside her like a shield against their judgment. The shawl hung differently on her shoulders now, no longer a hiding place but a mantle of dignity. As they walked, the evening shadows stretched longer across the street, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. Change hung in the air like the promise of spring, though winter still held the land in its grip. For the first time in years, Scarlet felt the weight of shame begin to lift from her shoulders, replaced by something that felt remarkably like hope. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Michael and Scarlet made their way from the church. Their boots crunched through fresh snow, leaving paired tracks behind them. The few townspeople still out turned away or whispered behind gloved hands as the pair passed. Michael's tall frame blocked some of the bitter wind as they approached Whitman's Mercantile. The weathered wooden building creaked in the cold, its second-floor windows gleaming in the winter light. A narrow external staircase led to Scarlet's rented room above the store. "Would you care for some coffee?" Scarlet asked softly, her hand resting on the stair rail. "It's the least I can offer after what you did back there." Michael nodded, following her up the wooden steps. The boards protested under his weight, but held firm. Scarlet's room was small but tidy, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner and a simple boarding house table near the window. Colorful woven blankets brightened the walls, and dried herbs hung in neat bundles from the ceiling beams. While Scarlet busied herself with a coffee pot, Michael stood near the stove, warming his hands. The familiar aroma of coffee soon filled the room, and they settled at the table. Scarlet's fingers wrapped around her cup, seeking its warmth. "I fear you've made things worse," she said finally, staring into the dark liquid. "The town already had reason enough to hate me. Now they'll turn against you too." Michael's scarred hands cradled his own cup. "I've weathered worse storms than whispers," he said. "These scars," he flexed his fingers, rope-like burns visible across the backs of his hands. "They earned me plenty of stares after the war. Some folks called me marked by the devil himself." Scarlet's eyes softened with understanding. "How do you bear it?" "By remembering that scars mean survival," Michael said. "They tell the story of what couldn't break us." A commotion outside drew their attention to the window. People were gathering near the post office across the street, clustering around Deputy Thomas Keene as he tacked up a notice on the bulletin board. Scarlet stood, squinting through the frosted glass. "Something's happening." They made their way down the stairs and across the street. The crowd parted slightly as they approached, more from surprise than courtesy. Scarlet pushed forward to read the notice, Michael close behind. Her face went pale as she read the formal text. "Notice of eminent domain, the Western Pacific Railroad. Company hereby gives notice of intent to acquire all lands south of Cottonwood Creek, including parcels previously granted under Spanish colonial deed." "No," Scarlet whispered, her hand flying to her throat. "That's my family's land. Our deed goes back 3 generations." Deputy Keene looked uncomfortable, but stood his ground. "Railroads got the law behind them, Miss Torres. That land is all I have left of my father," Scarlet said, her voice trembling with anger more than fear. "The deed is legal and binding." Michael stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "The county clerk's office is still open. You can ride there now, get this sorted." Scarlet nodded, grateful for his steady support. "My horse is at the livery." They retrieved their mounts, Michael's big bay and Scarlet's smaller pinto, and set out on the snow-covered road to the county seat. The afternoon light was already fading as they rode, their horses picking their way carefully through the drifts. Michael watched Scarlet from the corner of his eye, noting how she sat straight in the saddle, despite the cold. The last rays of sun caught the proud line of her jaw, reminding him of desert hawks he'd seen during the war. Beautiful and unbowed, the courthouse windows glowed with lamplight when they arrived. Inside, the clerk's office was warm but unwelcoming. The clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, peered at Scarlet's carefully preserved Spanish deed through wire-rimmed spectacles. "This is all in Spanish," he said, frowning. "The railroad's petition will be heard in an English-speaking court. But the treaty protected Spanish land grants, Scarlett protested. My father always said, what your father said and what the court will recognize are different matters. The clerk interrupted. You'll need a lawyer who understands these old claims. The ride back was darker and colder. Their lanterns swung between them, casting shifting shadows on the snow. Neither spoke much, but their shared silence held its own kind of comfort. Back at Scarlett's room, she laid out a simple supper of cold bread and the remains of the afternoon coffee. The food was humble, but the moment felt sacred somehow. Two souls finding fellowship in troubled times. I won't let you fight this alone, Michael said, breaking off a piece of bread. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of a vow. Scarlett looked up, meeting his steady gaze. Why would you risk helping me? You barely know me. I know enough, he answered. I know what it means to have people look right through you, like you're less than human. I know what it's like to carry scars that others use to judge your worth. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And I know that sometimes the only way to heal is to help someone else stand tall. The lantern flickered, casting warm light. Across the simple table where they sat, two outcasts sharing bread and purpose. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in white silence. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale rose when Michael trudged through the fresh snow toward Whitman's Mercantile. His breath clouded in the frigid morning air as he climbed the external stairs to Scarlett's room. Frost had transformed the window panes into delicate gardens of ice. Catching the first rays of sunlight, he knocked softly, hearing movement inside. Scarlett opened the door, already dressed, but wrapping a shawl tighter around her shoulders. The room behind her felt as cold as outside. Your fire's gone out, Michael observed, noting the gray ashes in the pot-bellied stove. Scarlett hesitated, pride warring with practicality. The wood pile's nearly empty. I was saving what's left. I'll fetch more, Michael said simply. He turned toward the stairs before she could protest. Wait, she called after him. You don't have to. I know, he replied, already heading down. That's why I want to. When he returned with an armload of split logs, Scarlett had cleared away the cold ashes. Michael built the fire with practiced hands, arranging kindling and logs just so. Soon, warmth began seeping back into the small room. There's coffee, Scarlett offered, gesturing to 2 cups on the table. And some cornbread from yesterday. They sat together, the fire crackling behind them. Scarlett stared into her cup, as if gathering courage. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above. A whisper. You should know the truth. About why they call me impure. Her fingers tightened around the cup. 3 years ago, a soldier came through town. Lieutenant James Crawford. He was everything I dreamed of. Educated, well-spoken, kind. Or so. I thought. Michael listened quietly, his face showing nothing but gentle attention. He promised marriage, Scarlett continued, a tear sliding down her cheek. Said he'd send for me once he reached his new post. I believed him, trusted him. And then she wiped the tear away angrily. Nothing, no letters, no word, just silence. And shame. That's why I went to the preacher's wife yesterday, she admitted. I thought if I confessed, if I showed proper remorse, maybe the town would. Fresh tears spilled. That's why I'm not pure. Why I don't deserve. Stop, Michael said softly but firmly. Broken promises don't stain your soul, Scarlett. His sin isn't yours to carry. Scarlett looked up, meeting his steady gaze. Something shifted in her expression, not quite hope. But perhaps it's beginning. The town hall bell tolled 11 times as they made their way down the snowy street later that day. The council meeting was already crowded when they arrived. Townsfolk, packed shoulder to shoulder in the warm room. A man in an expensive Eastern suit stood near the front. His silver watch chain gleaming. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order, introducing the railroad's representative. Mr. Harrison Wells, attorney for Western Pacific Railroad Company. Wells stepped forward, every movement precise and controlled. His eyes were the color of winter ice as he addressed the crowd. The railroad's claim is simple and legal. These lands were never properly registered under United States law. Spanish grants hold no standing. That's not true. Scarlet stood, her voice strong despite her trembling hands. The treaty specifically protected existing land grants. Our deed is valid. Wells turned toward her, his lip curling slightly. Ah, Miss Torres, your reputation precedes you. Perhaps if you had shown better judgment in other matters, your word might carry more weight now. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable at the obvious jab. Michael rose to his full height, his quiet presence drawing all eyes. Miss Torres has every right to be heard. Her family's claim deserves fair consideration. Mr. Boone speaks truth, Reverend Parker added, standing as well. We must judge this matter on its legal merits, not on gossip and innuendo. The crowd shifted, divided. Some moved closer to Scarlet in support, while others drifted toward Wells. Mayor Thompson called for order, scheduling a formal hearing for the following week. As people filed out into the snowy street. Scarlet caught Michael's sleeve. The way Mr. Wells spoke, it was like he knew about James, about everything. I noticed that too, Michael said thoughtfully, watching Wells climb into an expensive carriage. His words were too pointed, too personal. They walked slowly through the gathering dusk, lamplight casting long shadows across the fresh snow. Their boots left parallel tracks in the white powder. He knows something, Scarlet said. Finally, something about why James never came back. Why the letters stopped. Michael nodded grimly. We need to find out what. This isn't just about the land anymore, is it? No, Scarlet agreed. But how can we fight someone like him? He has money, influence, everything we don't. We have truth, Michael said simply. And we have each other. Sometimes that's enough to start with. They paused at the stairs to her room, the lamplight painting warm circles in the darkness. Both knew that tomorrow would bring new battles, but for now, they stood together in a quiet night. Two souls united against the gathering storm. The Wednesday sun hung pale in a pearl-gray sky as Michael and Scarlet guided their horses through knee-deep snow. Their breath frosted in the cold air, mixing with the steam rising from their mounts' flanks. The familiar crunch of hooves on snow marked their steady progress toward the Torres homestead. Michael watched Scarlet from the corner of his eye. She sat straight in her saddle, chin held high, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the reins. Every step brought them closer to the place she had left behind. Years ago, the land opened up before them as they crested a gentle rise. Snow blanketed the valley in pristine white, broken only by the dark shapes of scattered pine trees. In the distance, a weather-beaten cabin hunched against the winter sky, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. There it is, Scarlet said softly. Home. They approached slowly, their horses picking their way through the drifts. The cabin's weathered logs told a story of neglect. One wall leaned slightly, and shutters hung askew from rusted hinges. But even in its decline, the building held a dignity that spoke of better days. Scarlet dismounted first, her boots crunching in the snow. She stood motionless, staring at the cabin while memories played across her face. Michael tied both horses to a nearby post and waited, giving her the space she needed. Finally, she moved forward. Her gloved hand touched the doorframe, fingers tracing the worn wood where knife marks recorded the heights of Torres children through the years. Papa measured us here every spring, she whispered, even after Mama passed. The door creaked open at her touch. Inside, shadows pooled in the corners, and the air held the musty scent of abandonment. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight that filtered through grimy windows. Scarlet moved with purpose now, crossing to a loose floorboard, near the cold hearth. Help me with this, she asked Michael. Together, they pried up the board, revealing a small space beneath. Scarlet reached in and withdrew a leather pouch, its surface cracked with age. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The deed, she said, carefully unfolding yellowed papers. And Papa's letters? The documents were written in two hands, flowing Spanish script alongside careful English translations. He knew we might need both someday. He always said knowledge was power. Michael stood close, providing silent support as she read through the papers. The light grew softer outside as afternoon slipped toward evening. "We should eat something," he said finally. "I brought beans and coffee." Scarlett nodded, reluctantly setting the papers aside, while Michael built a small fire in the hearth. She explored the cabin's single room, touching familiar objects, her mother's carved wooden spoons, her father's old boots still waiting by the door. The beans bubbled in Michael's tin pot, their rich aroma filling the space. As they ate, Scarlett spoke of her childhood here, summer days spent helping her father with the cattle, winter evenings listening to her grandmother's stories by the fire. "She taught me so many songs," Scarlett said, her voice warm with memory. "Apache lullabies passed down through generations." She paused, then began to sing softly. The melody was gentle as flowing water, the words in Apache rising and falling. Like wind through pine needles, Michael sat perfectly still, his face transformed by the song's simple beauty. When Scarlett finished, silence held for several heartbeats before he spoke. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for sharing that." They rode back to town as dusk gathered, the setting sun painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. But their peaceful mood shattered at the sight of a crowd gathered outside the telegraph office. People pressed closer on the window, where a fresh notice had been posted. Michael shouldered through first, making space for Scarlett to read the telegram's stark message. The territorial judge had agreed to hear the railroad's claim immediately. 3 days, someone in the crowd muttered. "They're rushing it through." Scarlett's face paled, but her voice remained steady. Without a proper hearing, without time to present our evidence, she gripped the pouch containing her father's papers. "They mean to take our land before we can defend it properly." The crowd's reaction split like a fork in a stream. Some faces showed sympathy, others turned away in indifference. The railroad's influence cast a long shadow over the territory. That night in her small room above the mercantile, Scarlett knelt beside her narrow bed. Her grandmother's rosary beads clicked softly through her fingers as she prayed for strength, for justice, for guidance. Outside, Michael stood in the shadows beneath her window, his back straight despite the cold. Snow began to fall again, dusting his broad shoulders. He would stand guard until dawn, protecting her as best he could from whatever tomorrow might bring. His hand rested on the worn Bible in his coat pocket, thumbing the familiar verse about defending the cause of the fatherless and the widow. In the quiet night, he added his own silent prayers to Scarlett's, asking for the wisdom to help her save her heritage, and the strength to stand beside her in the battles ahead. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold. As Michael guided his horse through deepening snow toward the preacher's parsonage, the fresh powder muffled his mount's hoofbeats, creating an almost dreamlike silence broken only by the soft whisper of falling flakes. The modest white clapboard house sat nestled among bare-branched cottonwoods, smoke curling from its brick chimney into the pearl-gray sky. Michael dismounted, his boots crunching in the fresh snow as he approached the door. Before he could knock, Preacher Anderson opened it as if expecting him. "Come in, Brother Boone," the preacher said, gesturing toward the warmth within. "Something tells me this isn't a social call." Inside, the parlor glowed with lamplight and hearth fire. The preacher's wife had already set out coffee, its rich aroma filling the small room. Michael removed his hat, running calloused fingers along its brim. As he gathered his thoughts, "It's about Miss Torres," he began, "and the railroad lawyer." He described the mounting pressure against Scarlett's land claim, the whispered accusations, the rushed court date. The preacher's face grew grave as he listened. When Michael finished, silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft tick of the mantel clock. "There's something you should know," Preacher Anderson said finally, his voice heavy. "That lawyer, James Morton. I remember him from his days at Fort Lyon, 3 years back. He was stationed there as a lieutenant." The preacher paused, choosing his words carefully. "He courted a local girl, mixed heritage like Miss Torres, made her promises, then vanished with the spring thaw." Michael's heart sank like a stone in deep water. "Scarlett," he said softly. It was Scarlett, The preacher nodded slowly. I didn't make the connection until now. The girl never spoke his name, just came to. Emmy broken-hearted, seeking forgiveness for sins that weren't hers to bear. Michael's hands clenched into fists. And now he's back, using her shame against her to steal her land. The Lord works in mysterious ways, the preacher said, bringing truth to light in his own time. Across town, morning sunlight streamed through the mission church's windows as Scarlett sat cross-legged before the hearth, surrounded by the preacher's children. Their bright faces shone with curiosity as she taught them a simple Apache. Her grandmother had sung to her. Like this, she demonstrated, clapping out the rhythm. Mountain wind, eagle's wing, Mother Earth below. The children followed her lead, their small hands keeping time as they repeated the words. Their mother, Sarah Anderson, watched from her rocking chair, her needle pausing in its mending as she smiled at the scene before her. Again, the youngest girl begged when they finished. Please, Miss Torres. Scarlett's heart warmed at the simple acceptance in the child's voice. For the first time since returning to town, she felt truly welcomed, embraced without judgment or whispered criticism. The peaceful moment shattered like glass when the mercantile's door burst open later that morning. James Morton strode in, his expensive boots tracking snow across the wooden floor. Scarlett stood frozen behind the counter, her fingers gripping the edge for support. Well, well, Morton drawled, his voice carrying to every corner of the store. If it isn't the lovely Miss Torres, still keeping secrets about our time together. His eyes glittered with malice. About the child you bore? The few customers present turn to stare, whispers already beginning to circulate. Scarlett's face drained of color, but she held her ground. The door crashed open again as Michael entered, drawn by the commotion. His massive frame seemed to fill the doorway as he advanced. On Morton, righteous anger radiating from every line of his body. Michael, Scarlett's quiet voice cut through the tension. She laid a gentle hand on his arm, feeling the muscles coiled tight beneath his sleeve. Not here, please. For a moment, he remained rigid, towering over the smirking lawyer. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped back. Come on, he said softly to Scarlett. Let's get some air. They walked out together, heads held high despite the stares that followed them. Snow continued to fall, dusting their shoulders as they made their way to the relative privacy behind the mercantile. There, in the shelter of stacked crates and barrels, Scarlett's composure finally cracked. I should have told you, she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. James Morton. He was stationed at Fort Lyon 3 years ago. He courted me, promised marriage. Her voice caught. Then one morning he was gone. No word, no explanation, just gone. Michael's heart ached at the pain in her voice. He wanted to gather her close to shield her from the cruel tongues and colder hearts that had wounded her so deeply. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and fierce. He won't ruin you again. Not your name, not your land, not your spirit. Whatever it takes, we'll fight him together. Scarlett looked up at him, snowflakes, catching in her dark lashes. For the first time since that long-ago betrayal, hope flickered in her chest. She wasn't alone anymore. Here was someone who saw her worth, who stood beside her without shame or hesitation. Together, she repeated softly and felt the word take. Root in her heart like a promise, the snow continued to fall around them, each flake a tiny blessing, slowly covering the muddy tracks Morton had left behind. In the distance, church bells rang for evening prayers, their clear tones carrying messages of mercy and redemption across the winter-hushed town. The mission church stood, silhouetted against the deepening twilight, its windows glowing with warmth that spilled across fresh-fallen snow. Inside, wooden pews creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town, their faces illuminated by dozens of flickering candles. The rough-hewn walls threw dancing shadows as townsfolk settled in, their winter coats and shawls rustling. With movement, Scarlett Torres stood near the front, her shoulders straight despite the trembling of her hands. Michael Boone's solid presence beside her offered silent strength, his broad frame between her and the piercing stares of the curious crowd. The familiar scent of beeswax candles and pine wood helped steady her racing heart. Preacher Anderson cleared his throat from his position near the pulpit. We're gathered here tonight to hear Miss Torres's case regarding her family's land claim. His voice carried clearly through the hushed sanctuary. Let truth and justice prevail in this house. Of God, James Morton, the railroad lawyer, lounged against the front pew. His expensive coat and polished boots a stark contrast to the simple surroundings. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth as Scarlett stepped forward. With careful movements, she withdrew the weathered Spanish deed from her shawl. The paper crackled softly in the silence as she unfolded it. This land grant, she began, her voice quiet but clear, was given to my father's family generations ago. Her fingers traced the faded Spanish script. We have worked this soil, raised cattle on its grass, drawn water from its springs. Morton's laugh cut through her words. A piece of paper in Spanish? Hardly proof of anything in an American territory. Michael's jaw tightened, but Scarlett continued, reaching into her pocket to produce more documents. My father left these letters too, she said, holding them up so the lamplight caught the careful handwriting. Written both Spanish and English, describing our claim and our heritage. Her voice grew stronger. I am daughter to both this land and its peoples, Mexican rancheros and Apache wisdom keepers alike. The preacher stepped forward, accepting the papers with reverent hands. He adjusted his spectacles, studying the documents carefully. These appear entirely legitimate, he announced after a long moment. The translations are precise, the dates and details consistent. He looked up, meeting Morton's cold gaze. There's no legal reason to doubt their authenticity. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Mrs. Anderson, the preacher's wife, stood from her pew. I've heard Miss Torres teach our children songs in 3 languages, she said clearly. She honors all parts of her heritage and brings beauty to our community through it. Old Tom Webster, who ran the livery stable, cleared his throat. Torres cattle always were the healthiest in the county, he offered gruffly. Her pa knew how to work that land right. More voices joined in, some hesitant, others stronger. She helps with the mission garden. Tends to sick folks without asking. Payment? Never turned away a hungry child. Morton's face darkened as the tide of opinion shifted. And what of her moral character? He demanded, voice dripping with insinuation. Surely that bears weight on her fitness to hold property? Before the whispers could start, Michael stepped forward. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of thunder. This land is hers, he declared, meeting Morton's eyes without flinching. Her honor, too. He turned to face the congregation. Any man who says different can answer to me. Silence held for a heartbeat, then someone began to clap. The sound spread like ripples on water, filling the small church with approval. Not everyone joined in. Some faces remained set in disapproving scowls. Some lips still whispered behind raised hands, but the majority showed their support with applause and encouraging nods. Preacher Anderson raised his hands for quiet. Let it be recorded that this congregation has heard Miss Torres's testimony and found it worthy. We'll send letters supporting her claim to the territorial judge. Morton stormed out, letting the heavy wooden door slam behind him. The sound echoed through suddenly lighter air, as if a shadow had lifted from the room. As the crowd began to disperse into the crisp evening, Scarlett stepped out into the starlight. Her breath formed delicate clouds in the cold air as she tilted her face up to the vast, glittering sky. Michael joined her, his boots crunching in the snow. You did well in there, he said softly. We did well, she corrected, allowing herself a small smile. I couldn't have faced them alone. They walked together to the boarding house, where lamplight spilled welcoming from the windows. Inside, the landlady had kept a pot of stew warm on the back of the stove. The rich aroma of beef and vegetables filled the cozy kitchen as she ladled generous portions into bowls for them. Settled at the worn wooden table, Scarlett felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the hot food. For the first time in years, She allowed herself to imagine a future free from whispers and shame. The land would be secure, her heritage honored rather than scorned. "I'll ride with you to the county seat," Michael said, breaking into her thoughts. "We'll file the papers proper, make sure every detail's recorded right." Scarlett nodded, hope rising like a sunrise in her heart. "The tide's turning," she said softly. "I can feel it." The candle between them cast a gentle glow across their faces. As they shared the simple meal, each bite flavored with new possibility. Outside, stars wheeled across the winter sky, bearing witness to the quiet moment of victory, of dignity restored, of community beginning to heal. Frost still glazed the windows when Michael's boots crunched across the frozen yard to the livery stable. Stars glittered in the pre-dawn darkness as he harnessed the wagon horses, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. The leather creaked as he adjusted the traces, making sure everything was secure for the long journey ahead. At Scarlett's boarding house room, he found her already awake, carefully wrapping the precious documents in oilcloth. Her fingers trembled slightly as she handled the Spanish land grant, but her movements were precise. The deed, her father's letters, and the preacher's written testimony were all bundled together. "Ready?" Michael asked softly, helping her with her heavy shawl. Scarlett nodded, clutching the package to her chest. "As I'll ever be." They loaded the wagon in silence, tucking blankets around their legs against the cold. The eastern sky had barely begun to lighten as they set out, the wagon, wheels leaving twin tracks in the fresh snow. Michael handled the reins carefully. The road was treacherous with ice hidden beneath the powder. The sun rose slowly, painting the white landscape in shades of pink and gold. Their progress was slower than usual, with Michael often having to guide the team around patches of glare ice. Scarlett sat quietly beside him, lost in thought, her breath forming delicate clouds. By midday, they reached Cottonwood Creek. The water lay frozen beneath a thick crust of ice, silent under its winter blanket. Michael helped Scarlett down from the wagon, then gathered wood for a small fire while she spread a blanket on a fallen log. They shared a simple meal of hard bread and jerky, warming their hands by the flames. Scarlett stared into the fire, her face troubled. "What if?" she began, then fell silent. "Speak your mind," Michael encouraged gently. "What if facing him in court is too much?" The words tumbled out. The Morton. Just seeing him in church made my knees weak with shame. She wrapped her arms around herself. "How can I stand before a judge and face his accusations?" Michael's scarred hands tightened on his cup. "You're stronger than you know," he said firmly. "Your worth doesn't come from his words or anyone else's. It comes from above." He gestured to the vast sky. "And I'll be right beside you." Scarlett's shoulders straightened slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the horses' hooves marking steady time against the frozen ground. As evening approached, lantern light beckoned from Wilson's stage stop. A welcome sight in the gathering dusk. The innkeeper, Martha Wilson, showed them to the common, a room where several travelers already huddled near the hearth. After a simple supper of beans and cornbread, she pulled Michael aside, while Scarlett spread their pallets with fresh straw. "Railroad men been through here," Martha whispered, glancing around, talking about paying folks to speak against the Torres claim. Even heard tell they might try to influence Judge Parker himself. Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice low, much obliged for the warning. Later, as they lay on their pallets in the dim common room, Michael's deep voice carried softly through the darkness. "Lord, grant us strength for tomorrow's trial. Let truth prevail over gold, and justice over influence. Protect this good woman's rightful claim to her family's land." Scarlett lay awake long after his words faded, drawing comfort from his steady breathing. Nearby. Morning brought them to the county seat, the courthouse rising proud and imposing against the winter sky. Inside, the hearing room slowly filled with interested parties, railroad men in fine suits, local farmers and ranchers, curious townsfolk who had made the journey. Hours passed as witnesses spoke. Morton presented the railroad's claim with smooth confidence, describing progress and prosperity that would come with the rail line. His eyes glittered coldly when they fell on Scarlet. When her turn came, Scarlet rose on trembling legs. But as she began to speak, her voice grew stronger. She told of her family's generations on the land, of cattle raised and crops tended, of her father's careful stewardship. She presented the Spanish deed, the letters, the preacher's testimony. "This land is more than property to me," she said clearly. "It holds my heritage, both Mexican and Apache. My grandmother's songs still echo in its canyons. My father's sweat has watered its soil. It is my past, and with God's blessing, my future." Michael testified next, his quiet words carrying weight as he described the land's boundaries and Scarlet's constant presence there. Other witnesses followed, neighboring ranchers speaking of the Torres family's fair dealings, traders confirming years of cattle sales from the property. The judge, a gray-haired man with keen eyes, listened carefully. To all, when the last witness finished, he gathered the documents with deliberate movements. "This requires careful review," he announced. "I will consider all testimony and evidence before making my ruling." His gaze swept the room. "This court stands, adjourned until next week." As people filed out of the courthouse, something had shifted. Townsfolk who had once crossed the street to avoid Scarlet now stopped to clasp her hand or pat her shoulder. "Well spoken, Miss Torres," old Rancher Davidson said gruffly. "Your pa would be proud?" The winter sun was setting as they started. The journey home, painting the snow-covered plains in shades of purple and gold. Hope warmed them despite the cold air, bright as the evening star now appearing above the horizon. "Whatever comes," Michael said quietly. "You spoke your truth with dignity today." Scarlet smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. Like my father's daughter." The wagon rolled steadily, homeward through the gathering dusk, carrying its precious cargo of renewed hope and restored honor. Snow fell in thick, silent flakes as Michael and Scarlet made their way from the wagon to her rented room above the mercantile. Their boots left fresh tracks in the gathering white blanket, and lamplight from the windows cast long shadows across their path. The day's triumph at the courthouse felt distant now. Wrapped in winter's hush, Michael held the door, watching as Scarlet climbed the narrow stairs. Her shawl trailed behind her, dusted with melting snowflakes. The wooden steps creaked beneath their weight, marking their ascent in the darkness. Inside her small room, a single oil lamp cast a warm glow. The walls were bare except for a small cross hung above her bed, and a faded photograph of her father on the simple dresser. Scarlet removed her shawl, draping it carefully over the back of a wooden chair. Without a word, she knelt beside her narrow bed. Her hands clasped together, head bowed in prayer. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "for giving me strength today, for helping me speak truth before the judge." Tears slipped down her cheeks, glistening in the lamplight. "Thank you for sending someone to stand beside me." Michael lingered in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. The lamp's glow caught the scars on his hands, marking old wounds that had healed but never faded. He watched her pray, his expression soft with unspoken tenderness. Scarlet remained kneeling, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. "Maybe," she whispered so quietly he almost missed the words. "Maybe I'm not ruined after all." Michael's voice came low and certain in the stillness. "You never were." Their eyes met in the lamp's warm light. Something passed between them, delicate as a butterfly's wing, precious as morning dew. Neither spoke again, letting the moment hold its own weight. With visible reluctance, Michael stepped back into the hallway. "Rest well," he said softly, closing her door with careful hands. Scarlet listened to his boots descend the stairs, each step fading until only the winter silence remained. She changed into her nightdress and slipped beneath the quilts. Peace settling over her like the snow outside her window. Dawn came too soon, announced by sharp, urgent knocking. Scarlet jolted, awake, her heart pounding. The door burst open, revealing Michael's tall frame. His face was grim, his breath coming fast. "Smoke," he said tersely. "Beyond town, near your land." Scarlet threw on her dress and boots, fingers fumbling with the buttons. They raced down the stairs and out to where Michael had already saddled 2 horses. And the morning air bit cold and sharp, carrying the acrid scent of burning wood. They galloped hard through the breaking dawn, hooves thundering against frozen ground. Scarlet's heart hammered in time with their rhythm, fear rising in her throat. As they crested the last rise, her worst fears took shape before them. Flames devoured her family's cabin, reaching hungry fingers toward the pale sky. Orange light danced against the snow, creating a hellish glow. Several neighbors stood helplessly by, their faces lit by the inferno. Some held empty buckets, useless against the fury of the blaze. No, Scarlet breathed, sliding from her horse before it fully stopped. No, please, no. She ran toward the burning building, but Michael caught her arm. Too dangerous, he said, holding her back as she struggled. The letters, she cried. Papa's letters. But it was too late. The roof collapsed inward with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling upward like fallen stars. The heat pushed them back, forcing them to watch as generations of memories turned to ash. Old man Davidson approached, his face black with soot. Saw riders leaving just before first light, he said grimly, wearing railroad company coats. Scarlet broke free from Michael's grip and stumbled forward. She fell to her knees in the snow near what remained of the front porch. Her trembling hands sifted through the ashes, finding fragments of charred paper, all that remained of her father's careful documentation. His loving words in 2 languages reduced to black flakes that crumbled at her touch. Everything, she whispered, ash-stained tears tracking down her cheeks. They've taken everything. Michael knelt beside her in the snow. His strong hands, gentle now, lifted her from the ashes. Not everything, he said firmly. You're still here. We'll rebuild. But Scarlet sagged in his arms, the light gone from her eyes. The spirit that had burned so bright in the courthouse yesterday seemed extinguished like the last embers of her childhood home. Every precious thing she had reclaimed, her dignity, her heritage, her hope, felt stolen again. Scattered like ashes in a bitter wind, the ride back to town was heavy with silence. The sun rose fully now, painting the sky, in shades of scarlet that seemed to mock their despair. Scarlet rode slumped in her saddle, not speaking, not crying anymore. The morning light caught the soot on her dress, the ash in her hair, marking her again as someone who had lost everything. Michael rode close beside her, watching her face, seeing the shadows gather behind her eyes. The proud woman who had stood before the judge yesterday seemed far away now, replaced by someone small and broken. His jaw clenched as he remembered her whispered words from the night before. Maybe I'm not ruined after all, now answered by this cruel dawn. The sound of their horses' hooves marked time like a funeral drum as they approached town. The morning, sun casting their shadows long across the newly fallen snow. Morning light crept through Scarlet's window, but she remained motionless in her chair, staring at the charred remains of her family's deed. The paper's edges were blackened and curled, though most of the text remained legible, a small mercy she couldn't bring herself to feel grateful for. The smell of ash still clung to her clothes and hair, a bitter reminder of all she had lost. Michael knocked softly before entering with a plate of fresh biscuits and eggs from the boarding house kitchen. Steam rose invitingly from the food, but Scarlet turned away. You need to eat, Michael said, setting the plate on her small table. What's the use? Her voice came out hollow, empty as the burned-out shell of her family's cabin. She ran her, fingers along the deed's scorched edge. Everything I touch turns to ruin. Michael pulled up a chair beside her. That's not true. We can still fight this. The judge will want to know about leave me. The words fell between them like stones. Just leave me be. I bring only ruin to those who try to help. Her shoulders trembled with suppressed grief. Michael's scarred hands tightened on his knees, but his voice remained gentle. No, I won't leave you to face this alone. He stood slowly, as if approaching a spooked horse. Let me take you to the preacher. His wife asked after you this morning. Scarlet closed her eyes, exhaustion written in every line of her body. After a long moment, she nodded slightly. It took all her remaining strength derived from the chair, but Michael's steady presence helped her find her feet. The walk to the parsonage was mercifully short. Fresh snow had covered their tracks from yesterday, making the world seem clean and new, a stark contrast to the ashes in Scarlet's heart. The preacher's wife, Sarah, opened the door before they could knock, as if she had been watching for them. "Oh, my dear girl," Sarah breathed, pulling Scarlet into a warm embrace. The simple gesture of kindness broke something in Scarlet's chest, and she found herself crying into the older woman's shoulder. Sarah guided her inside to the kitchen, where a cheerful fire crackled in the hearth. She sat Scarlet down close to its warmth, pressing a cup of hot tea into her trembling hands. "Listen to me," Sarah said firmly, keeping one hand on Scarlet's shoulder. "I know it feels like everything is lost right now, but from ashes new beginnings can grow. The Lord has not abandoned you." The preacher joined them, his Bible in hand. As evening shadows lengthened across the floor, they gathered near the fire. Michael sat close to Scarlet, his solid presence, a comfort she didn't want to admit she needed. "Remember," the preacher said, opening his worn Bible, "how Scripture speaks of the stone the builders rejected becoming the cornerstone. Sometimes what others cast aside becomes the very foundation of something new and beautiful." Scarlet stared into the flames, letting the familiar words wash over her. She wanted to believe them, but doubt and despair had dug deep roots in her heart. The fire's warmth couldn't seem to touch the cold place inside her as night deepened. The preacher set his Bible aside and leaned forward earnestly. "Michael, we need to gather witnesses." Old Davidson said he saw the railroad men. There must be others who noticed something that night. Michael nodded, already rising. "I'll ride to the nearby farms. Someone must have seen or heard them coming, or going in this cold." Scarlet looked up, barely seeing him for the first time that day. "It's bitter out there now. There now." "Truth won't wait for warmer weather," Michael said simply. He shrugged into his heavy coat and pulled on his gloves. "Besides, tracks will still be fresh in the new snow. Might tell us something useful." The preacher's wife brought him a packet of food and a thermos of hot coffee. "Be careful out there," she cautioned. "The temperature's dropping fast." Scarlet followed Michael to the door, watching as he checked his saddle straps and adjusted his scarf. The night air bit sharp and cold, his breath visible in white puffs under the porch lamp. He mounted smoothly, gathering the reins in his gloved hands. "You don't have to do this," Scarlet said softly. "Not for me." Michael looked down at her, his face half hidden in shadow. "Yes, I do." Something in his voice made Scarlet's heart flutter strangely. She watched as he turned his horse toward the road, snow swirling around them in the lamplight. His figure grew smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed him completely. Standing there in the cold, watching the spot where he had vanished, Scarlet felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just duty driving him out into the bitter night. It wasn't pity or obligation that made him fight so hard for her cause. The realization washed over her like a warm wave. This was love. Pure, steady, and true as the stars now emerging above the snow clouds. She hugged herself against the cold, tears freezing on her cheeks. The knowledge of his love should have brought joy, but instead, it filled her with a new kind of fear. What? If she really did bring ruin to everyone who cared for her? What if loving her put Michael in danger? "Come back inside, dear," Sarah called softly from the doorway. "He'll be back when he can." Scarlet allowed herself to be led back to the fire, but her heart rode with Michael into the snowy night, praying for his safety as he searched for witnesses who might help restore her stolen justice. Dawn painted the snow-covered hills in shades of rose and gold as Michael guided his horse along the frozen trail. His breath fogged in the crisp morning air while he traced the paths between scattered homesteads. Fresh tracks in the snow showed where the railroad's men had passed. Multiple horses heading south toward Scarlet's land on that fatal night. At the Davidson farm, the old rancher stood on his porch, coffee cup steaming in his weathered hands. "Been expecting someone to come asking," he said, gesturing Michael inside. Saw them clear as day, riding past with torches. Railroad bunch, for certain. Recognized that fancy gray horse their boss rides. Michael's gloved hands tightened on his cup as Davidson described the men. "Would you be willing to put that in? Writing? Tell it to the judge?" Davidson's lined face hardened. "Reckon I would. Ain't right, what they did to that Torres girl's place. My pa always said good fences and honest deeds make good neighbors. Railroad men ain't either." The winter sun climbed higher as Michael rode on. At the Miller place, Mrs. Miller recalled seeing strange men asking directions to the Torres land. The Cooper boys, out checking rabbit traps, had spotted riders leaving the area just before the fire was discovered by late afternoon. Michael's horse was tired, and his own muscles ached from hours in the saddle. But he had what they needed, Davidson's promise to testify, plus 3 other witnesses who would sign statements about the railroad. Men's movements that night. Purple shadows stretched across the snow when Michael finally rode back into town. The church bell was ringing for evening service as he dismounted at the parsonage, his boots crunching on fresh snow. Inside, warmth and light spilled from the parlor doorway. The sound of children's voices raised in song drew him forward. Scarlett sat at the small piano, surrounded by the preacher's children and several others from town. Her dark hair gleamed in the lamplight as her fingers moved over the keys, teaching them a hymn. The children's sweet voices filled the room. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. She glanced up as Michael entered, relief and joy flickering across her face. The sight of her there, sharing her gift of music despite all her troubles, made his chest tighten strangely. She looked more at peace than he had seen her since the fire. Mr. Boone, the youngest child, Emma, ran to hug his legs. "Miss Torres is teaching us new songs." "So I hear." He smiled down at the little girl. "You all sound mighty fine." The preacher's wife appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be frozen through. Come, there's hot stew and fresh cornbread waiting. Children, time to head home for your own suppers." After the children had gone, they gathered around the kitchen table. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, the cornbread golden and steaming. Michael felt warmth slowly returning to his bones as he described his day's efforts. "Old Davidson will testify?" Scarlett asked, hope threading through her voice. "He saw them?" Michael nodded. "Clear as day," he said. Others too, the Millers, the Cooper boys, all willing to sign statements about what they saw. The preacher pulled paper and ink from his desk. "Let's get those statements written up proper, while the details are fresh." He began drafting formal declarations as Michael repeated each witness's account. Scarlett watched them work, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I never thought," she whispered. "All this time, I believed I was alone, that no one would stand up for the truth. Folks around here believe in justice," the preacher said, looking up from his writing. "Maybe they needed reminding of that, but they know right from wrong." Outside, wind rattled the windows as a snowstorm moved in. Michael sat by the hearth after supper, methodically sharpening his knife against a whetstone. The familiar motion helped settle his thoughts after the long day. Soft footsteps made him look up. Scarlett approached, carrying a thick wool blanket. "You must be tired after all that riding," she said quietly. She draped the blanket over his shoulders, her fingers brushing his arm. "Much obliged." The brief touch sent warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the blanket or the fire. "Thank you," she said softly, settling into the chair beside him. "For everything, for believing in me when no one else would, for not giving up." "Never will," he answered simply, setting aside his knife. Their hands rested close together on the chair arm, not quite touching but aware of each other's warmth. The storm howled outside, rattling the windows with fierce gusts. But inside, beside the glowing hearth, something fragile and precious was growing between them: trust, understanding, and perhaps something more. Neither spoke for a long while, content to share the peaceful silence while snow piled deep against the window panes. The preacher's quill scratched steadily as he completed the witness statement. Each signature they would gather tomorrow would be another stone in the foundation of Scarlett's case. Michael watched the firelight play across her face, seeing how hope had begun to replace the despair in her eyes. Whatever came next, she was no longer alone in her fight. Morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as wagons and riders gathered outside the courthouse. Michael helped Scarlett down from her horse, steadying her trembling hands. Behind them, Old, Davidson and the other witnesses clustered together, their breath steaming in the cold air. "Remember," Michael said softly, "you ain't alone today." Scarlett nodded, clutching her father's charred deed wrapped carefully in clean muslin. The courthouse steps seemed to stretch endlessly before her, but Michael's presence at her shoulder gave her strength to climb them. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. It seemed half the town had turned out to watch. The preacher and his wife sat in the front row, offering encouraging smiles. Even Mrs. Miller had closed her shop to attend, her usually stern face softening when Scarlett passed. The railroad lawyer slouched at his table, his fancy suit wrinkled from drink. His eyes narrowed as Scarlett took her seat, but she lifted her chin and met his gaze steady. She wasn't that frightened girl anymore. The territorial judge entered, his black robe sweeping behind him. After calling the court to order, he gestured for Scarlett to present her case first. With Michael's steady hand beneath her elbow, she approached the bench. Her fingers shook as she unwrapped the deed, but her voice rang clear as she described finding her homestead in flames. "Your Honor, this deed proves my father's rightful claim to the land," she said, carefully laying out the fire-damaged document. "It was granted to my family by Spanish authorities and confirmed when the territory changed hands." The judge examined the charred paper closely. Though scorched at the edges, the elegant script remained legible. The official seal still visible. Old Davidson testified next, his weathered face stern as he described the railroad men he had seen riding towards Scarlett's land that fatal night. "Recognize that fancy gray horse plain as day," he declared. "Same one that lawyer there rides around town on." The railroad lawyer's face reddened. He started to object, but the judge silenced him with a sharp look. One by one, the other witnesses shared what they had seen. Mrs. Miller telling of strange men asking directions. The Cooper boys describing riders fleeing the area just before dawn. Smoke already rising behind them. The lawyer shot to his feet when his turn came. "These people are lying," he shouted, jabbing a finger towards Scarlett. "That woman has no right to the land. She's nothing but a—" "Careful, sir," the judge interrupted coldly. "Another outburst like that, and I'll hold you in contempt." Michael's hand tightened on the rail before him, but Scarlett touched his arm gently. The lawyer's words couldn't hurt her anymore. The judge shuffled through the witness statements, studying each carefully. The courtroom held its breath. Finally he looked up, his expression grave. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find Miss Torres's claim to the land valid and binding." His gavel cracked sharply. "Furthermore, the railroad shall pay full restitution for damages to her property. This court also recommends an investigation into the suspicious fire." Joy burst through Scarlett's chest as applause erupted from the townsfolk. She swayed slightly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Michael's strong hands steadied her, his own eyes bright with emotion. The lawyer stormed from the courtroom, shoving past onlookers. His face was twisted with rage as he glared at Scarlett through the window, mouthing what looked like a threat before disappearing down the street. The preacher approached, beaming. "We're having a celebration supper at the parsonage tonight," he announced. "The whole town's invited to share in your victory, Scarlett." That evening, laughter and warmth filled the parsonage. Ladies from church brought their best dishes, Mrs. Miller's famous chicken pie, sweet potato casserole, fresh-baked rolls. Children darted between adults' legs while the menfolk discussed plans to help rebuild Scarlett's cabin come spring. Scarlett sat beside Michael at the long table, joy bubbling up inside her with each kind word and smile from neighbors who had once shunned her. His solid presence anchored her as emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "Feels almost like a dream," she whispered to him. "It's real enough." His voice was gruff with feeling. You fought hard for this. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of the lawyer lurking across the street, his face dark with hatred. The sight sent a chill down her spine despite the warm room. The preacher noticed, too. He drew Michael aside, speaking low. Best keep sharp watch tonight. A man's most dangerous when his pride's been hurt. Michael nodded grimly. I'll see her. Home safe. Later, in her room above the mercantile, Scarlet knelt beside her bed. Moonlight spilled through the window as she bowed her head in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for justice done today, she whispered. Please guide my path ahead. And she hesitated, thinking of Michael standing guard outside. Please protect those who have protected me. She could hear his steady footsteps in the street below, pacing beneath her window. Though danger still lurked in the shadows, for the first time in years, hope bloomed bright in her heart that 2 nights after the court victory, bitter wind whipped through the darkened streets. Scarlet hurried from the mercantile, clutching her. Shawl tight. The hour was late. She had lost track of time helping Mrs. Miller inventory new stock. A figure stumbled from the saloon's yellow lamplight. The railroad lawyer porter swayed on his feet, whiskey bottle dangling from his fingers. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face flushed with drink. Well, if it ain't the half-breed who thinks she's better than honest folk, he slurred, blocking her path. Scarlet's heart hammered, but she lifted her chin. Please move aside, sir. Don't you sir me. Porter spat on the ground. You fooled that judge with your act, but I remember what you really are. Just a dirty savage who spread her legs. That's enough. Michael's deep voice cut through the night. He stepped from the shadows, positioning himself between them. His broad shoulders seemed to fill the street. Porter sneered up at him. Defending your horror boon? She give you what she gave me? Michael's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice steady. Walk away now, Porter, while you still can. Or what? You'll hit a man of the law? Porter swung the bottle wildly. Everyone should know what she is. How she begged me to. The bottle shattered against the boardwalk as Michael grabbed Porter's collar, lifting him until his feet barely touched the ground. I said enough. Doors creaked open along the street. Townfolk emerged, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Miller stood in her doorway, mouth set in a hard line. The preacher hurried forward, his wife close behind. Put him down, Michael, the preacher said quietly. He's not worth the trouble. Michael released Porter, who staggered backward. But the lawyer wasn't finished. He pointed a shaking finger at Scarlet. You're all blind. She's nothing but a... Stop right there. Mrs. Miller's sharp voice cracked like a whip. She marched forward, gray hair bristling. I've heard enough of your poison, Charles Porter. Scarlet Torres has worked honest and hard in my shop for 2 years. She's shown more dignity facing your cruel lies than you've shown in your whole miserable life. Other voices joined in. That's right, shame on you. Leave the girl be. Porter's face twisted as he realized he'd lost his audience. He spat once more and stumbled away, cursing into the night. Scarlet stood trembling until Michael's gentle hand touched her shoulder. You're safe now, he murmured. The preacher watched Porter disappear on the corner, then turned to address the gathered. Townsfolk, brothers and sisters, meet me at the church at dawn. It's time we made things right. As pink sunrise painted the sky, people filled the little church. The preacher stood before them, his Bible open on the pulpit. We failed one of our own. He began. While we listened to gossip and judgment, we forgot the Lord's command to love our neighbors. Miss Torres lost everything in that fire. Today we make amends. Heads nodded. Voices called out offering help. Within hours, wagons loaded. With lumber and supplies rolled towards Scarlet's land. Women packed baskets of food while men gathered tools. Even children bounced with excitement, carrying light loads of nails and canteens of water. Scarlet watched in amazement as the community transformed her scorched homestead. Old Davidson directed the men in setting corner posts. The Cooper boys hauled stone for the foundation. Mrs. Miller organized other women in laying out a noonday feast. Never seen such a gathering, Michael said softly, pausing beside her, with his hammer. Scarlet wiped tears from her cheeks. I never thought, after everything, you earned their respect, showed them true grace. By afternoon, the framework of a new cabin rose against blue sky. Women sang hymns while quilting a blanket for Scarlet's bed. Children played tag between the workers, their laughter bright as spring water. Scarlet moved among them all, learning each helper's name, thanking them with a voice thick with emotion. Mr. Davidson, Mrs. Cooper, little Sarah. Their smiles warmed her more than the autumn sun as dusk painted the sky in purple and gold. Lanterns were lit around the half-built cabin. Someone brought out a fiddle. The preacher's wife started a hymn, and soon everyone joined in, voices rising sweet and clear in the gathering dark. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Scarlet stood in the circle of lamplight, singing words that now felt truly her own. I once was lost, but now am found. Michael watched from the edge of the gathering, his heart full to bursting. Firelight danced across Scarlet's face, highlighting her smile, her eyes bright with joy. In that moment, the truth he'd been feeling. For weeks crystallized into certainty, he loved her, completely and without reservation. Not despite her past or her heritage, but because of the strength and grace she'd shown through all her trials. The hymn ended, but its echoes lingered in. The crisp night air. Tomorrow would bring more healing. But tonight, under stars just beginning to shine, a broken community had taken its first steps toward restoration. February melted into March, winter's icy grip loosening day by day. The land around Scarlet's homestead stirred with new life as patches of earth emerged from beneath the snow. Fresh timber rose steadily into walls and rafters. The cabin taking shape under caring hands, Michael came each morning as the sun crested the eastern hills, his broad shoulders already bearing an axe for the day's work. The steady thunk of his blade against pine logs marked time like a heartbeat. Other helpers drifted in and out, the Davidson boys setting shingles, old Cooper crafting window frames, but Michael remained constant as the North Star on this particular morning. Scarlet stood in the doorway of her nearly finished cabin, watching him work. Sweat gleamed on his forearms despite the lingering chill. She had grown used to his presence, the way he moved with quiet purpose, how his eyes always found her when she brought water or food to the workers. Miss Torres. Sarah Miller's voice piped up from the newly tilled garden plot. Look what Papa brought. Scarlet turned to see the merchant's daughter proudly presenting 3 saplings, their roots carefully wrapped in burlap. The girl's father stood behind her, more trees loaded in his wagon. Apple and pear, Miller explained, tipping his hat. Thought you might like a proper orchard started. Tears pricked Scarlet's eyes. That's too generous, Mr. Miller. Nonsense. Sarah here insisted. He smiled at his daughter, said every home needs fruit trees. Michael paused in his work, coming to inspect the saplings. Good stock, he noted. Soil's thawing nicely for planting, too. They spent the morning settling the young trees into the earth. Scarlet showed Sarah how to pack the soil just so, the way her father had once taught her. The girl listened intently, her small hands patting each tree as if blessing it that other helpers arrived throughout the day. The preacher's wife brought fresh bread and stew for everyone. Mrs. Cooper contributed a hand-sewn curtain for the new window. The cabin hummed with activity and chatter, laughter floating across the clearing like birdsong as afternoon shadows lengthened. The workers began heading home. Sarah skipped ahead of her father's wagon, singing an Apache lullaby Scarlet had taught her. One by one, the others said their goodbyes until only Michael remained. He stood looking at the newly planted trees, hands in his pockets. Might I stay a while longer? He asked quietly. Got the makings of coffee in my saddlebag. Scarlet's heart quickened. I'd like that. They built up the fire pit together, the familiar routine requiring few words. Soon coffee bubbled in Michael's battered pot, its rich aroma mixing with wood smoke. The sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in deep purples and golds. Scarlet wrapped her shawl tighter, settling on a log beside the fire. Michael handed her a tin cup their fingers brushing briefly. The coffee's warmth seeped into her hands as she watched embers dance in the growing darkness. "I never thought I'd have this again," she said softly. "A home. People who," she trailed off, searching for words, "who see your true worth." Michael suggested that she nodded, tears threatening again. "When Porter left me, I believed everything good in my life had ended, that I'd never be more than his lies about me." Michael's jaw tightened at the lawyer's name, but his voice remained gentle. "And now?" "Now?" Scarlett looked around at her half-built home, the sleeping fruit trees, the vast star-scattered sky above. "Now I feel like I'm waking up. Like everything before was a long, dark dream, and finally," she pressed her hands to her heart, "finally, I'm real again." Michael set his coffee aside and turned to face her fully. The firelight caught the scars on his face, but his eyes were warm and steady. "Scarlett," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. "I've been wanting to ask. That is," he took a deep breath. "These past weeks, helping you, they've meant everything to me. But I don't want to just be your helper anymore." Her heart stilled. "What do you want to be?" "Your partner. In all things." His voice grew stronger. "I love you, Scarlett Torres. Not out of pity or duty, but because you're the bravest, most beautiful soul I've ever known. If you'll have me, I want to build a life here with you." Tears spilled down Scarlett's cheeks, but she didn't brush them away. "You don't mind that I'm not, that others might still." Michael reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "You are pure and precious in God's eyes, and mine. The rest doesn't matter." She looked at their joined hands, dark and light together. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a long while now." Michael's free hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb gently brushing away her tears. Slowly giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a kiss as soft as spring rain. Not like that first kiss in the church, born of defiance and protection, but one of tender promise and cherished love. When they parted, Scarlett felt lighter than air. The shame she'd carried for so long had finally lifted, replaced by joy so deep it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient dance. Witnesses to love's power to heal and make new, they sat together by the dying fire, planning their future in quiet voices. The cabin would need a proper kitchen, Michael mused. And more fruit? Trees? Scarlett added. Their dreams mingled with the smoke rising toward heaven. Two hearts becoming one under the vast Colorado sky. April sunshine bathed the valley in golden warmth, casting long morning shadows across Scarlett's newly rebuilt cabin. Apple and pear blossoms dotted the young orchard with white, their sweet fragrance carried on the gentle spring breeze. Neighbors began arriving early, their wagons and carriages forming a half circle near the fresh-painted fence. Women hurried about, arranging wildflowers in tin cans and mason jars, while men set up wooden benches in neat rows. Children darted between adults, their Sunday best already showing signs of play. The preacher's wife made final adjustments to the simple white dress she'd sewn for Scarlett, her needle flashing in the sunlight as she secured the last ribbon. Inside the cabin, Scarlett stood before the mirror Michael had mounted just yesterday. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed the dress, marveling at its delicate stitching. Sarah Miller appeared at her side, offering a bouquet of prairie flowers tied with faded blue ribbon. "You look like an angel," the girl whispered, eyes shining. Scarlett squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Pequagan." Outside, Michael waited beneath an arch of twisted willow branches. His usually worn work clothes had been replaced by a clean black suit, borrowed from the merchant. His scarred hands clasped and unclasped, betraying his nerves despite his steady expression. The preacher took his place, Bible open, as townsfolk settled onto benches. Even those who had once whispered against Scarlett sat respectfully, many smiling now. The lawyer had left town weeks ago. His influence faded like winter frost and spring sunshine. Mrs. Cooper began playing her wheezy pump organ, and Sarah led. A group of children down the makeshift aisle, scattering flower petals from their apron pockets. The congregation rose as Scarlet appeared in the cabin doorway. She paused for a moment, remembering that cold Sunday months ago when she'd first whispered her shame in church. Now, she lifted her chin and walked forward with dignity, each step carrying her toward love and redemption. Michael's eyes never left her face as she approached. When she reached him, he took her hand as naturally as breathing. The preacher smiled at them both before addressing the gathering. "Beloved," he began, "we witness today how our Lord makes all things new. What was broken, he has made whole. What was cast aside, he has lifted up." Scarlet's eyes misted as the preacher spoke of God's endless mercy and love's healing power. Michael's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, steadying her. When time came for the vows, their voices rang clear and true across the spring-touched land. "I do," Michael promised, his deep voice carrying to the farthest bench. "I do," Scarlet echoed, her heart overflowing. The congregation stood as one when the preacher declared them husband and wife. Their voices joined in amazing grace, the hymn floating across the valley like a blessing. Children tossed remaining petals skyward as Michael kissed his bride, sealing their covenant before God and community. Later, as sunset painted the sky in rose and gold, Scarlet led Michael to where one last fruit tree waited to be planted. Together, they lowered it into prepared soil, their hands joining to steady its roots. Standing in the fresh-turned earth, memories of shame suddenly washed over Scarlet. "Please," she whispered, eyes downcast, "I'm not pure." Michael lifted her chin gently, his gaze full of tender understanding. "No," he said softly, "you're redeemed, and that's better." Tears spilled down Scarlet's cheeks as she pressed her face against his chest. His arms encircled her, strong and sure as the land beneath their feet. Together they looked out over their homestead, the cabin rising proud against the sky. Young trees reaching toward heaven, fields ready for planting, the sun's last rays. Gilded everything in sight, the fresh painted walls, the scattered petals, the faces of friends lingering to share their joy. As darkness softened the valley's edges, stars began appearing one by one, witnesses to love's power to restore dignity and hope. Hand in hand, Scarlet and Michael stood on their threshold, their futures stretching before them bright with promise. What had once been threatened now blossomed secure, protected by love, faith, and the strength of hearts made new. If today's story reminded you of the quiet strength of love, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow we'll meet right here, where love speaks softly and stays.